Aussie! Oi!
Maybe get to voting age!
Thank everyone for coming, especially Fraser Running.
Be all living under Sharia law if we keep going the way we're going.
Wait, what's your horse's name? Wait.
Our country is under attack. With as many cheap immigrants as possible.
Racism and hatred every single time.
Migrants are welcome, Nazis are not.
Like a tough cut.
Sudanese are welcome, racists are not.
Well, for anyone who had any doubts, the horrific scenes last Saturday at St Kilda should dispel that doubt that right here in Melbourne in 2019 we have a living, breathing, goose-stepping, Sikh hireling, SS-loving, brawling in the streets, fascist movement. And for anyone who's been paying attention today, in history and in Melbourne recently, we can all think of at least 6 million good reasons why we can't let that movement grow and spread.
My Italian grandmother, my nonna, remembers when her father was taken away by Nazis to be murdered. My grandfather fought Nazis in Italy and they both came to Australia to start a new life after fascism destroyed their country. I think it is sickening, ridiculous actually, that all these years later their granddaughter is standing here with all of you fighting against Nazis. This should obviously not be happening right now.
The kind of moment we're in where the far right, the fascists and the Nazis, it has to be said, had quite good numbers, and look, they tried to have a beach party. The weather was shit, but despite that their numbers were worryingly large, and it's worth noting as well that I think their turnout was harder than usual. You had your kind of open swastika wearers, you had your hardened kind of street battlers in the True Blue crew, the kind of people who want to organise, train up and beat the shit out of migrants and oppress people, all the people they hate. One thing to just keep in mind is we stopped Cronulla 2.0. That's straight up. I mean, I always ask the question with these rallies, what would it have looked like if we hadn't been there, if the campaign against racism and fascism, which has been organising for a number of years now in Melbourne, hadn't have been there, and I think it would have been pretty ugly. It would have been Cronulla 2.0. It would have been them marching around the beach, goose-stepping around the beach, intimidating immigrants, intimidating whoever they wanted, and potentially starting a race riot. So I think everyone who was there should be proud of the fact that they helped us stop that.
The far-right rally said the whole thing was about people of African appearance being involved in violence on St Kilda Beach, but you don't buy that?
No, not at all. I mean, the way that the rally was set up was by having someone who has attended celebrations of Hitler's birthday trying to provoke some African kids by filming them playing soccer in order to have an excuse to call a demonstration. But even the date of the demonstration demonstrates that this was not at all about some sort of community concern. This was about far-right politics, Nazi politics. The date of the demonstration was the 100th anniversary of the formation of Nazism in Germany. That was the whole point of this rally, is to try and build far-right politics in Melbourne.
Can I just ask, have you experienced racism in Melbourne?
Of course I have.
What's happened to you?
Several counts of racism, from being mistreated, spoken to harshly, dirty looks. Those are all hurtful things to any character. You know, like just public rules in general, which like white people would find offensive, like black people find offensive too. But like obviously people are just like judged and accused of being violent mongrels, but maybe people like lash out in that way.
It's pretty scary for the Jewish people of the community to be seeing this happening in a place that we always thought was safe, you know. And hopefully the Nazi movement won't grow, and that this early kind of counter-protest, and hopefully the media also and the politicians being critical of these neo-Nazi activists.
To be honest with you, I'm tired of being tarred by the actions of a few, as if I also committed those same crimes. I'm tired of people having to come out and having to say the obvious, having to tell people that racism should not be acceptable in our modern society. I'm tired of my little cousins walking around feeling like they're different, feeling like they don't belong in this country that they were born in because of the color of their skin. I'm tired of people looking at me as if I am a danger to their society because of my height or because of my skin color, things I cannot help. I am proud of who I am, and unfortunately we do have to come out here. We do have to have a voice. We do have to tell people that that type of ideology, that type of hatred, that type of negativity, racism, Nazism is not acceptable in our modern day society. Last week at St Kilda Beach, we had a vile, horrible display of hatred. We had people come out and do Nazi salutes, people that call themselves patriots. However, we had people that were out there to show them that they are not going into the future with us. That type of thinking is not something we're going to carry on. They cannot bully kids. They cannot inbox children and tell them to come to St Kilda Beach and fight them. It's not a new struggle that we're facing. Last year, years before that, it's been years of the media making my people look like we're some beasts or some horrible creatures or we're just violent human beings. We are the same as everyone that's here. I have my own goals. My mom has her own goals, her own ambitions, her own views for the future. I go to school. I went to school since I was a kid. I've grown up here. I am Australian. I shouldn't have to say that.
The higher authority of government protects racists in our politics and our police. Institutional racism is a big fat no. Victorian police stops the car when a black man is driving to ask the Caucasian girl if she's okay because she's with a black man. Victorian police, you stop the black guy off the street and ask him if he knows anything about the robbery that went down a few weeks ago. Victorian police, you stop African kids asking them stereotypical questions, selling them the portrait you have already painted of them, convincing them that despite being born here, these African kids will always have to answer to a higher Caucasian authority. You coax them, you coax Muslims, you coax all the outsiders to accept this feeling of always being an outsider, ready to be questioned because someone that looks like them is blacklisted in your books. We respect freedom of speech, but we do not stand for freedom of alienation. We do not stand for freedom of double standards. We do not stand for freedom of colorism. We will not facilitate the freedom of police and the government authority to make us feel like we owe an explanation for the stigma they associate to the skin, to the colour of our skin, or the clothes that we wear, or the scarf on our head.
These are people who were given confidence by decades of the media in this state in particular, demonising Muslims and now demonising the African community. They were out there, Nazis on our street, confident to march, because constantly the media and politicians in this country are intent on demonising the Sudanese population, of painting them as gangs, of painting them as criminals. And so we're here today to stand against all of their racism. Every time we come out and protest against Nazis though, the media tries to say, oh no, but they're not really Nazis, are they? They're just, activists.
So, what is the core of Nazism? The superiority of the white race. According to Adolf Hitler, the super race, particularly Aryans with blonde hair and blue eyes, was destined to dominate the world because of their purity and strength. This is what can happen if you're not part of the master race. A bit of my family history to explain why I'm standing here today. My mother's father was murdered at Brunswick, a holding station for Jews in France before they were sent to Auschwitz, which is where both my father's parents were sent and where they both died. I was told that my grandmother committed suicide in Auschwitz by throwing herself against the electric fence as she'd learned that she'd been chosen by Dr. Mengele, nicknamed the Angel of Death, to be one of the people he would do his deadly experiments on. My mother, her mother and brother managed to escape Paris to Lyon, the then Free French zone, with the help of people smugglers, who'd also organised false papers for them. My father had been sent away from Paris by his parents and joined the French resistance. He was involved in sabotage and other actions, and after he was shot in the leg by Nazis, he worked in intelligence. My Aunt Rose Goldbloom survived the ghetto, the slave labour camp in Auschwitz, and for the rest of her life she had a number tattooed on her arm. It's interesting to note that the current fashion of tattoos has not been taken up by Jews.
First they came for the Muslims, then they came for the Africans, and now they're saying pretty soon we're going to start taking on the Jews. So are we meant to sit there and say, oh, but we should do what's polite? No, we're here today to take a stand. We're here today to fight racism in this country, to fight Nazism in this country, and to say, no Nazis, never again. Because what we want to do here today is we want to show everyone who saw the footage of Nazis taking to the streets of St Kilda last week, we want everyone who saw that to see that there are hundreds of people who will come out in this city to oppose racism, to oppose Nazism, every single time it rears its head in this country.
People always ask me what they can do. People always ask me, what can I do to help? What can I do to stop this? What can I do to assist? Simple conversation is a big step. Making sure when someone is having a racist conversation saying, oh, I don't know about these Sudanese guys, I don't know about these N-words, I don't know about these Indians, I don't know about these other minority groups. Being there to go, no, we don't accept that here. You can't continue with that. Making sure the people, last week at St Kilda Beach, I wanted to be there. But I knew that I can't give into these middle-aged weirdos, these neo-Nazis that stay online, messaging kids, because I know that's what they wanted. I know what they wanted to do. They wanted to videotape me and go, here's another black person that's ignorant, that is violent, that is this. Mute my voice and say what they want to say about me. Put me in mortal, put my community in mortal. So I couldn't be there. I told my friends not to go. I told my community, please don't be there, because there's a real danger for your life. It takes one person with racist ideals. It takes one person to be able to take a life. Then we're going to be at a funeral where no one else sees. There's no cameras at his funerals. We're going to be there crying, sobbing our eyes out, missing our friends. No one's ever going to talk about it, because apparently our lives don't matter or aren't as important as others. I can't see that. I can't see that happening. I don't want to see that happening. That's why I'm thankful that there was people there, because the things that I can't do as a black man in society, there's a privilege I don't have that a lot of you do have. And if you do have that privilege, you need to use it. A camera getting a video of white people saying that it's not okay for this racism, right, against other neo-Nazis, right, is a very different story. They would depict that as, yo, left versus right. They would talk about the idea. If it was me there, Sudanese gang versus Australian people. This is not new. Last year, they tried to pass a bill, the anti-assimilation bill, right? That was directed in my community, and I knew it was directed in my community. We have Mark Knight depicting my people as if we're gorillas or animals or less human. There needs to be consequences for these people. They can't just continue. They can't just be on the news for a day and they continue with their lives and their jobs. We have to make sure that these people see consequences. Make that a symbol for everyone else that have the same racist ideals. I'm not going to walk around like I'm on eggshells in my own country, because I am Australian as everyone standing here. I shouldn't have to say that, and I'm tired of saying that. Unapologetically, I am Australian. I don't care how you feel, regardless of who you are.
And let me tell you, the accomplishments of Sudanese people, of African people, of migrant people, of Muslim people, of the public transport workers, the people who keep our system going every day, their contributions to our everyday society, to our schools, our communities, our universities, our research, our science, our technology, to our media, as I said, to the public transport system and keep us going every day. Their contribution to our society is something that the Fraser Ratings and the Polyhansons and the fascists and Nazi thugs could only dream of making. They'll never have that. They'll never be able to claim that. In their wildest dreams, they'll be able to make that difference.
But if we think that the fascism that we're seeing and the racism that we're seeing is confined to a few people on the fringes, that's not true. Let's look to Canberra, okay? So in 2014, you might remember the Attorney General, George Brandis, saying in the Senate that people have a right to be bigots, as he was seeking with his government to repeal protections in the Racial Discrimination Act that protected people against hate speech. Shame, indeed, shame. You might remember government senators lining up to shake Fraser Anning's hand when he completed his inaugural speech. Shame. It's probably just easier if I hold it. You might remember the government voting in favour of a motion put forward by Pauline Hanson supporting white supremacy. Shame. I don't think it's hard to imagine the connection between what we're seeing now in St Kilda and what we're seeing in Canberra. Just as the federal government attack workers, they are attacking the Sudanese, Muslim, other communities, and we stand in solidarity with every single one of those groups. Union members and workers are from a range of different backgrounds too, and so attacks on the many different communities represented here today are attacks on workers too.
Our African and our Muslim communities, Australian communities who are bearing the brunt of this hysteria, that we are with them. We stand in solidarity with them and we are here to support them. And sadly, we have seen this happen before in Australia. But every time it's happened before, we have beaten them. At the last state election, the Liberal Party right here in Victoria tried the same tactics of trying to use a law and order agenda to confect fear, scapegoat communities and pit people against each other. And you know what Victoria did in response? You voted against them and nearly wiped them out. And here we go again with an election around the corner. We have this cycle on repeat, by being whipped up by these right-wing racists, egged on shamefully by politicians who do not represent us, who do not represent Australia. But you are a powerful force of resistance. Last Saturday, I joined so many of you at a peaceful picnic to show support for the communities that are being targeted by these right-wing extremists. And since then, I've been inundated on social media by these right-wing trolls. They tell us that they're out there doing Nazi salutes, not because they're racist, but because they're afraid of gangs and crime. And I wanted to share with you a few of the many messages that I have been receiving, a few of their complaints, and I apologize for some of the crudeness of their own language, but I think it's really important to hear what they're saying. Mick wrote to me and said, "I'm disgusted by what you stand for. You are not Australian and you don't belong in this country." Theo wrote to me and said, "To defend my country was once called patriotism, now it's called racism." Nate said, "It wasn't anything to do with racism or multiculturalism. One rogue done a salute and now hundreds of people are Nazis. It's about violence with the black Africans on Australians. Until you're bashed and raped by such people, you won't get it into your one-sided head," Nate said to me. Graham said to me, "The rally has nothing to do with racism, so why make a strong point? It is to do with immigrants not accepting our way of life, or customs or laws, and bringing their crap baggage and behaviours with them instead of finding a new and better way in life in our country. We won't stand for it," Graham said. And John said, We have to stop all Muslim and black African immigration before the crime and terror level gets to the point where we cannot control it. Well, I have to tell you something, John, Graham, Nate, and Theo. That is racism. When you discriminate and hate based on race or culture or ethnicity, that's racism. When you blame and target and scapegoat entire communities, generalizing across entire communities, excluding them, pitting us against each other, that's racism, and that has no place in Australia. And I want to tell you that the Greens are here with you every single step of the way, and we will call it out every single time. And I want to thank you for being here, because for everyone who's here, for every image of this rally that we now hope gets shown on our TV screens across this state and across this country, there is somebody who is alone and excluded at home, who's hearing these messages of racism and feeling like they don't belong here. But they do belong here. We all belong here, and you are helping them to make them feel included in this country and stamp out this horrible, vile, dark period of our history that we will win. We will win this, and we will stamp out this racism, keep calling it, keep naming it, keep marching on the street, and we will win. Thanks, everyone.
Aussie, Aussie! Aussie, Aussie, Aussie! Say no to Nazis! Say no to Nazis! Thank you very much. Last Saturday we saw a rally. We saw a bunch of people that call them patriots. I want to ask you a couple of questions. Do patriots represent you? No. Does Blair Cottrell represent you? No. Does Neil Erickson represent you? No. Thank you very much. They don't represent me either. They don't. I'm pretty sure all the Victorians who are at home, all Australians who are at home, are not represented by this group. They're not represented by Blair Cottrell. They're not represented by Neil Erickson. They represent themselves, and they represent their own agenda. We say no to them. Today, you could have chosen to be with your families, having coffee, enjoying the nice weather, going to the beach. But instead, you chose to be here because you represent the best of the Australian people. Because you don't want our emerging communities, our minorities, not to be ostracized from our society. The South Sudanese people came to this country to seek a better life. The South Sudanese people did not come to this country to destroy this country. I did not come to this country to destroy this country. I want to make this country a better country. I know so many young South Sudanese people that want to make this country a better country. And that's why we want to send a very strong message to Blair Cottrell, to Neil Erickson, to all the neo-Nazis wherever they are, whether they are here in Melbourne, whether they're in Queensland. That's why we want to send a very strong message to Fraser Anning that you do not represent the finest of what we Australians stand for. Last Saturday as well, we saw a group of Australians turn up to St Kilda Beach because they believed this country is better than what that small group of Nazis want to represent. African Australians stayed away from St Kilda Beach, but our friends, our fellow Australians turned up in support. Our message was heard louder than the neo-Nazis' agenda. Did you hear them saying the coward Africans stayed away? Because they were scared. They saw Australians turning up and say, we don't accept your agenda, go away.
Some of the most powerful forces in our society have worked very hard to create a far-right movement in this country. And I'm talking about the Liberal Party and their dance with Pauline Hanson back in the 90s and more recently. I'm talking about Rupert Murdoch and the Herald Sun and Channel 7 advertising these people as patriots rather than the Nazis that they are. And of course I'm talking about the Labor Party failing to challenge that racism, agreeing to a bipartisan regime of torture directed against refugees. That is what helps to lay the basis for a racist movement in this country. So that's what brings us here today. The next question is, what are we going to do about it? 4 quick points. Number 1, turnout in numbers, and this is a sight for sore eyes. We want the biggest numbers possible, we want the most organisations here possible, and the great thing about today is to see the unions represented here. Because the Nazis can't agree on a hell of a lot. The Nazis can't agree on who's going to be Führer. The Nazis can't agree on who's the master race this week. One thing they can agree on is their hatred of organised labour. So it is fantastic to see Victorian Transport Council here, to see the Finance Sector Union here, to see the Independent Education Union here, to see the Retail and Fast Food Workers Union here, to see the National Union of Workers here, the Australian Services Union, the National Tertiary Education Union, and I know that there's individuals from other unions, including the Rail, Tram and Bus Union and other unions. Building on that will be crucial if we want to push these Nazis back. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is the propaganda effort to counter the racism and to counter the fascism. Point number 3 is that we have to counter them directly. Any time they want to occupy physical and political space, we have to be there in numbers to deny them that space. And point number 4 I think we need is a new sort of politics. A politics of solidarity to counter the politics of hatred and fear that they peddle. And a politics of struggle to counter the politics of despair and racism that they thrive on. And to finish up, of course, they've got a lot going for them. They've got the media going for them. They've got some of the most powerful forces in our society going for them. They've got the bigot-in-chief in the White House going for them. All we have is ourselves. So let's take it to the streets.
What can the Greens do in Victorian Parliament to counter the far-right protests?
Well, it's really important that we stand up every single time, that every parliamentarian, everyone who's representing Victorians, stands out and calls us out this racism every single time. We also have to stop legislation that is designed to pit people against each other and scapegoat communities that we have seen with the law and order agenda, and that's what the Greens do every single time.
Okay, and you were at the rally, the counter rally last week. And what was your main observation about what you saw on that day?
It was scary, and it's scary to see the rise in numbers and the anger of the fascists, of the people who are spouting this type of racism. It's so dangerous for our country. We are a strong multicultural community. Our strength is our diversity, and we cannot be going backwards.
No racism, no fear!
Nazis are not welcome here! No racism, no fear! No racism, no fear! No racism, no fear! Nazis are not welcome here! No
I'm from Brazil, we are from Brazil, and we just elected far-right president, and we are here in solidarity to the Australian people to fight the right wing. Yeah.
It's a global issue.
It's a global issue.
Fight fascism before it grows.
No racism, no fear!
Nazis are not welcome here. No racism, no fear. Nazis are not welcome here. Nazis are not welcome here.
I'm here today because I've been seeing firsthand the racism that the African community have been experiencing in Melbourne and in Australia, and I think it's despicable. I live in Middle Park, near St Kilda. I was at the rally last week, but in weeks before that I've been seeing personally the ridicule that the African community have been under, not just by citizens but by the police as well, and I think it's despicable. We all need to be out here campaigning against this bullshit. I was at a party in St Kilda this week, a few weeks ago, where a dad made a racist remark saying that he thought Sudanese gangs might come to the party, and this is just one example of the blatant racism within wide communities that is going on, and I think it's despicable. We need to stamp it out. I called him out on it on the spot, even though it was his son's 18th birthday, and afterwards I had a big chat with him about it, and I said that he ruined my night. He was apologetic and said it was the media talking. We need to be pushing against what the media, the government, and what other citizens are pushing for. No racism, no fear. Migrants are welcome here.
Geordie, you were at the counter protest last week, and the organisers of the main rally said their rally was about African crime. What do you think about that statement?
I think it's clearly, it's obviously bullshit, right? What they're using discourses of African crime as a mobilising tactic. They know that it has somewhat of a purchase in the community at the moment, particularly because the media and politicians are really feeding and have created this myth and this panic around so-called African crime. It's incredibly racist. What they're there for is because they're the far right. They're Nazis, they're fascists, they're anti-Semites, they're racist, they're homophobic and sexist, they're anti-worker, they're, everything the left opposes. And that's what they were there for, was to try to create space for the growth of far-right sentiment. And I think, there was way too many of them, and I think it's really quite alarming how many of them are there, and it's a really good lesson to the left that we need to be stronger, we need to come out more, we need to make sure there's no space for these people and for their ideas, and that means not just fighting them on the streets, but also, making clear the connections with, settler colonialism. It's the very foundation of this country. It's a dispossession and continued dispossession of Aboriginal people from their land, and so we need to ensure that that we're building a broader movement, that we're making clear the connections and fighting it wherever we can.
In the 1990s, we had the situation where national action was popping up in Melbourne, and I was involved in a group called Brunswick Against the Nazis, where we successfully ran national action out of Brunswick with their tails between their legs. But a couple of years later, they were back, and they set up what they called a bookshop in Fawkner, but it was really more of a bunker where they were presenting themselves as nationalists and seeking to try and recruit disaffected youth in that multicultural working class suburb. I was part of Campaign Against the Nazis, where we ran a tenacious and disciplined campaign that went for a period of more than 12 months, where we built a movement.
I'm so proud to have been a part of organising this today. I mean, we had people from various different sections of the union movement. We had the Greens out here, we had the Sudanese community speakers out here, and we just had a really huge crowd. Having hundreds of people come out and say we're not going to accept Nazis in our street has just made me so proud to have been a part of it. There was a couple of individual far-right people hanging around the edges trying to see what we were doing, but none of them had a hope of having an impact on our demonstration because it was too big.